Today we're putting down the sewing machine. I'm going to show you a few hand stitches you probably need to know if you're getting into sewing. I'm going to stop talking and we're going to go straight into it. So I'm using a piece of like calico fabric to kind of demonstrate the stitches that we're going to do. So the stitch that I'm going to start off with is a back stitch. So to start, I'm threading my hand needle and I'm making sure that I tie my thread at double knot in the end. I typically double up my fabric, sorry, not my fabric, my thread, and I'm going to start by passing my needle through the back of the fabric and pulling it all the way through the top. I've laid it flat so it's easier to see. So then I'm grabbing my needle and I'm pushing it about a couple of millimeters away from that first point, still along the same line, and I'm pushing my needle all the way down. So here you can see that we have our first stitch, and to make that second stitch I'm pushing my needle back through the back end about a couple of millimeters, so the same distance that I left for that first stitch. So I'm pushing it back up, pulling my needle all the way through. And then when I'm pushing my needle back through the back side, I will stick it the back side. That sounds weird. But I'm sticking my needle through the first stitch that we made, as you can see. I'm pulling my thread all the way down. And I'm just going to repeat that process of stitching up a couple of centimeters away, making sure that it's equal distance, and then sticking the needle back through that first hole, or the last stitch that we just made. A back stitch is a stitch that most resembles the stitch that you'll get on the sewing machine. So it's great if you are trying to secure something in place, or if you don't have a sewing machine and you want to do a sewing project. I remember the first sewing tutorial that I did, or the sewing project that I did, I stitched most of it by hand using the back stitch, and it held up pretty well. So it can be a bit of a slow process, but it's great for those secure stitches that you need to make. And it kind of looks like a continuous line, and at the back it kind of looks the same as well, a tiny bit more overlapped or overlaid. And I'm just going to tie off the thread by doing a double knot. So yeah, wrapping the thread around my fingers, pushing the needle through, holding it a little bit with my finger to make sure that I tie them as closely to the fabric as possible. And then I'm just going to snip a couple of millimeters away from that to finish off that stitch. And there we have our back stitch. The second stitch I'm going to show you guys is a running stitch. I'm not sure why it's called running stitch, maybe because it kind of looks like a run, but I know that this stitch is great for creating gathers. So if you're creating a skirt and you want to gather it, or a sleeve and you want to gather it, using a running stitch is perfect for that. So in the same way, I'm just going to go ahead and start by threading my needle and tying the end into a double knot. And then again, I'm going to pass my needle through the back end of the fabric, and then again stitch back down a couple of millimeters away from the first stitch that I made. So there we have our first stitch. I've made that stitch about 4 millimeters or 3 millimeters in length, and then the aim is to keep doing that stitch, so going back and forth or going up and down with your needle, as you can see here, and making sure that it's equal distance for all of the stitches. So when you stitch up, it's an equal distance. When you stitch down, it's an equal distance. Once you get the hang of it, you can kind of do what I'm doing here and just weave your needle up and down, and then pull the needle through, and then that way you can make quite a few stitches at the same time. And again, if I was to pull my needle, it would start to gather, so that's why this stitch is perfect for creating gathers, like on a skirt or on a sleeve. So essentially that's all there is to it when it comes to this stitch. Just stitching up and down, keeping that same distance, a couple of millimeters, or about 3 to 4 millimeters, and then tying it off at the back with a double knot once you have finished your stitch as well. So the next stitch I'm going to show you is a basting stitch, and this looks very similar to a running stitch, but for this one it's essentially almost the same as a running stitch, but you want to create bigger or larger stitches. So I'd say about leaving a centimeter or a centimetre and a tiny bit extra for the stitches. And again, pushing your needle all the way through the top, pushing it back down, so leaving about a centimetre, pushing it all the way back down, leaving the same distance again when you're stitching or pushing your needle back through, and then making the stitch that way. Again, if it's easier for you to weave your needle up and down through the fabric and pulling it through to make quite a few stitches at the same time, then that works perfectly as well. And then in terms of what you would use this stitch for typically, it's typically if you are a beginner sewer, or if you have a seam and you want to make sure you stitch it really neatly on your sewing machine, you would do a basting stitch to secure it instead of using pins. And that way, when you go over it with your sewing machine, you can easily like kind of snip it and pull it out, because it is quite a gappy thread or stitch that we're doing. So here we have 3 stitches. We have our back stitch, we have our running stitch, and we have our basting stitch. The final stitch that I'm going to show you guys is a hemming stitch. So for this one, I'm going to create kind of like a hem, so at least I can hem the bottom of this fabric. I'm going to do this hem the best way I know how to, which is to make it look like an invisible hem. So I'm just going to pin along the hem just to make sure that it sits evenly so it's easier to stitch. Granted, if you are doing the typical hem, I would recommend pressing it before you stitch, just to make it a bit easier when you are kind of hemming it here. And then what I'm going to do, as always, I'm starting off by doing a double knot with my thread, and I'm pulling up the folded edge of the hem, and I'm going to stick my needle I'm just picking up a couple of threads and pushing my needle all the way up just at the very corner, and then I'm going to push my needle through the other side, pick up a few threads of the fabric, and then I'm going to stitch back up. To do that, I'm going to push my needle through right next to where I've made that first stitch. I'm going to travel my needle through just a couple of millimeters, and I'm going to pass it down. So passing it out here, picking up a tiny bit, so a couple of those threads on the other side, and then pulling it up, and then pulling it through. I'm trying to make sure that I hardly pick up any threads, so I'm skipping a tiny bit. Yeah, if you can pick up less threads, the less threads you can pick up, the better, because the more invisible it will kind of be. And I'm going to repeat that all along the hem, so allowing my needle to travel through the gap for a few millimeters, and then pushing my needle down and picking up a couple of those threads there, and then pushing my needle back up again through that, and traveling my needle a couple of millimeters again. Hopefully the way that I explains that makes sense. Hopefully the visual will add a bit of clarity as well. So you can see what it looks like on the opposite side. I think the key to a neat hem stitch is, one, the less threads you pick up on the other side, the better, and because the more invisible it is, firstly, and then keeping an equal distance in between your stitches as well, because that's going to make it look like a very evenly spaced hem stitch. Granted, you'll be using the same color thread as the fabric that you're using, so it will look much more invisible and seamless than mine currently does with my red fabric or red thread, but you just want to continue that all along the length of the hem, and I will show you how to finish it off. So to finish off the thread, I'm pushing my needle through the back side, so I'm making sure this is the back side, so I'm just making sure that I pull my needle through there, and I'm just going to do a single knot. You can do a double knot if you prefer. I think I did a double knot actually, and then I'm tying that off and then snipping that to secure it in place, and then you are all done with your hemming stitch. And this is what the back looks like rather, and then the front looks like this. And there you have it, your back stitch, your running stitch, your basting stitch, as well as your hemming stitch. Hopefully this video has helped you. Make sure you check out this sewing tutorial next as well, and I'll see you over there. Bye guys.